Welcome back to the Play Their Way podcast and Happy New Year. This is the place that we talk about all things in child first coaching. I'm your host, Laura Jane Jones, and today I'm excited to welcome our special guest, Erin Williams. Welcome, Erin. Great to have you with us. How are you today?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so pleased to be here, and I've been looking forward to this for a while, so thank you.
Erin wears many hats, and amongst them is the Wales Women's Lacrosse Senior Team Manager, but she's also an inclusive sport educator, and I guess that's why you're here today, because among lots of other things, you have produced a resource with us at Play Their Way to speak to LGBTQ plus sport and sports inclusion for young people. So I thought maybe we could start with you telling us a bit more about that resource.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was fantastic to be approached by Play Their Way and to hear how much people really wanted to learn about creating inclusive environments for LGBT young people and for allies as well, because we really do find it's not an either or, it's an everybody. So a lot of it was colored by my own experience growing up in sport, and then my working career working in inclusive sport and running sessions and combining everything between being a coach and being a player and working with parents and sort of saying, I was quite lucky that I mean, I won't tell you how old I am, but growing up in the 90s and in the early noughties, I was very lucky that it was quite rare that I had some out queer role models that really made a big difference for me as I grew up, and not it really, really is rare, and it's not as rare now. But sometimes there's not necessarily that knowledge of how to deliberately make sessions inclusive, or to really live up and be that role model that people think you are. So it's a great to be a part to spread the learnings and hopefully get more people on board with the deliberate action for inclusion.
When we talk about inclusion in sport and young people's sport, we look at the kind of groups of perhaps race or gender or religious identity, all of these different things. Oftentimes, LGBT identities can be overlooked because we're talking about young people. Why is it so important that actually we're making sure that we're not overlooking this because of retention of participation?
Yeah, it's I mean, as you say, it's super important, and in many ways, LGBT, rights and the movement and identities is very firmly tied to being an adult, and I think it's been weaponized in many ways. Don't talk to children about this, and all of that. But first of all, LGBT identities are more than just who you're attracted to. It's who you fall in love with, and love is an amazing thing, and we should be talking about that from whatever, that anybody could love anyone, no matter what their gender is. And young people also have LGBT parents, family members, friends. There are kids who are playing with two mums, two dads, a non-binary parent and a mum. So it's really important, the way that we would with anything, to be inclusive of all families. And then as kids get older, we have people who are very, very young knowing their identities. And I was about 16 when I figured myself out. I was 20 before I told anybody. And, that's the older side of being a teenager. But that is still 4 years of keeping a secret. And then coming to practice and being tired, or really going off the handle if I made a mistake, or things like that. And I know this happens to countless young people. So if we can do anything to help take the pressure off, signal that is a safe environment, that people will be supported, that you don't have to keep it a secret, then that's a great thing to do.
You talked about that yourself and figuring yourself out. We know that for a lot of young people who, I hate to use the word struggle, but for a lot of the time it is a struggle for them when they're young. It's a feeling of being different and not necessarily knowing why they feel different. And that can lead to them pulling out of participation and not wanting to be part of sports environments anymore. So even if children don't know why it is they feel different, or what it is about them that is perhaps standing out from their friends, how important is it that we make sure that all of them feel safe in these sports environments, through the messaging around LGBT plus relationships?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think it's interesting, and there was in a previous place of work, we did a little bit of research with a very small group of young people. So this is, I can't cite it as anything more than this, but we found that the young people we spoke to were bullied at school. They felt unsafe at home. They felt unsafe on the buses, but the only place that they felt safe in their whole lives was when they went to these particular sports sessions. And that was very, very similar. That spoke to me because it was similar to my own environment of not being safe at home, not being comfortable at school. But as soon as I could step on the pitch and physically express myself, it wasn't necessarily verbally. It was just me playing sport, and I felt like that was really tied to, a physical expression. I felt free, and everyone really should be able to have that, no matter no matter who they are and no matter who they love. Um, and unfortunately, we do see people dropping out. So it is really absolutely critical to make sure that that environment stays. I think sometimes they're accidentally inclusive, but we really want to make them deliberately inclusive so that if the coach changes or new people come along, or if the young people get older and then move up to a new age group that and may have a new coach, then that is going to be a consistent experience for them throughout their process.
One thing we talk about so much in sport is how we have the ability to set the tone for society when we're educating young people. And we love to be proud of that. We love to talk about the fact that children learn all of these great social skills and societal skills from sport. So actually, when we're talking about LGBT plus inclusion, we're not just talking about the children that perhaps will fit into those groups, but just educating them on society as the whole and being allies for when they're not in sports environments. That must be part of this as well, isn't it, Erin?
It really is, and I go back to the role model that I had. I was about 14, 15. This was a lacrosse coach I had. I knew that she and her wife, actually, they weren't legally married at the time. They couldn't be, but they were trying for a baby, and all the rest of our teammates, who were all, they were all straight. Um, they they were just like, we were all super excited for them, and it was that visibility that ingrained in them as straight allies, the concept of allyship from a young age, and how that then shaped their lives growing up to have and see that difference. So in worlds where we might not always be exposed to difference, and difference is something that should be celebrated. It's really important to, as much as we can, deliberately be visible, be inclusive, and be clear about why that's important.
It's interesting when you talk about that, it just sounds like such natural allyship. And I reflect on my own journey through sport and the friendships I have. And I work predominantly in rugby. So many of my friends are gay women. So many of my best friends are. And it also means I get to officiate a few weddings, which is quite fun.
Love that.
We know that women's sport is a real safe place for gay women. I think, though, sometimes we need to divide this down the middle and look at men's sport and women's sport, and in this case, girls' sport and boys' sport. How much can coaches, or how much do coaches need to be doing to make sure that in boys' sport, if they hear homophobia, transphobia, any of these issues, they're nipping it in the bud and making sure that sport, from now onwards, we are setting this out as a safe place for these groups?
I mean, it is absolutely, absolutely critical. And it's a really interesting point you make there. And I think what it goes down to is, I don't want to get all highly theoretical here, but the root of homophobia, biphobia, transphobia is misogyny. It's anti-women. It's anti-feminism. So the idea that kicking like a girl, or you're so gay you kick like a girl, you might hear that in a boys' sport. It's all this idea that being feminine and being a woman is bad. Gay men are considered to be, weaker, quote unquote. They're not, because they they like men and women like men. So there's all those ties, and it is the root of it. Um, so women's sport is kind of free of that to an extent, to a really limited extent, because just in the very nature of being an active woman, you're kind of bucking. You're being a trailblazer. You're bucking trends. But in men's sport, there is a still some in some ways that tie. So when I would say as a coach, watch what you say around women as well, um, and because it all does tie together. And a great way to do that is, use examples of women. If you're a footballer, use example of women's footballers. There's tons of them who probably do it better than the men, on a world stage. Use them as an example of what to do when you're doing a skill, or try very hard to avoid gendered language and all of that. So it all ties together. And I should say, women's sport is not free of it. I mean, I grew up very much as the only queer person on a lot of teams I was on, and it did feel lonely. But I think there was that aspect of we all knew we were doing something different by doing what we were doing.
What impact do you think the changing role models has had on women's sport then? I know that you and I are probably a similar age, and I look back to the 90s when it would have been figure skaters, gymnasts. They would have been very much the kind of sports Barbie dolls that the women that were held up for us to look at and want to be like. Whereas now, if you look at the biggest selling sports stars in women's sport, there's a pretty even divide now of who is gay and straight, because it's not a conversation anymore, but it's also not being chosen for us, we're choosing them for ourselves. Do you think that's changing things for young girls in sport?
Yeah, I think it is, and even on a more micro level, when I was younger, and actually Jess Fishlock, the Welsh footballer, has spoken about this. Love her.
Yes, we do.
Yes, she said that she had role models that she knew that weren't famous outside of anywhere, but she could see that, and that spoke to me so much, because if you look at somebody who is held up, you respect them, your parents respect them, your teachers respect them. They love the same thing you do. They play the sport you play. They're passionate about the same thing you're passionate about. Um, that's all amazing things for anyone who connects with these players. And then for them to be out and open about who they are, and who they love, then that just takes it that little step further of, look, I can do that. I can, as I said before, that visibility. So in the last sort of 20, 30 years, it's gone beyond what's just happening on that small level that might have been happening in, you know, great role models at schools. Or, I mean, the role models that I had growing up were not necessarily LGBT, but they were the girls who were in, year 13 when I was in year 7, and played sport. That sort of thing. So looking at that, but bigger, and having everyone across the world, across the country, turning around and saying, you know, I want to be like Beth Mead, or I want to be like, Ilona Mayer, or whoever it is, depending on the sport. When used to work a lot with boys' football academies, and you would ask them, who do you think is the best at such and such, and they would all be like Mary Earps, and it would be like, yes, of course she's the best goalie, and you're not talking about. I said, who's the best goalie in football? It wasn't who's the best women's goalie. So the more we can break down those stereotypes and those assumptions, because the same groups of boys would be like, oh yeah, I have a gay friend at school, or oh yeah, like, it's all right, my brother's gay and he's a great footballer too. So it's all part of that same mentality of open the door, and magic will flow through.
I love you referencing Mary Earps in relation to little boy footballers. Last year, my friend's son had a Mary Earps shirt and a Sam Kerr shirt for Christmas, and no male footballers, which I
Love
really
it.
loved. And I felt like that was real progress. There's going to be a lot of male coaches listening to this who are going to feel quite overawed by the subject matter. And I think one of the messages we need to get across to them is this isn't about tomorrow you go into your coaching setup and say, okay, from now on we're going to wear rainbow shorts with our kit so that we can show our allyship. It's about micro allyship, isn't it? It's about making sure that misogyny doesn't exist, like we've discussed, but also holding up different role models. What are some ways that coaches can do that without it feeling like they're really pushing this?
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about the big little things, so those tiny, tiny things that you can do. Um, Ask people, depending on the age group you're coaching, but if they're slightly older, don't assume people have a. If you're coaching boys, don't assume it's a girlfriend. Just say, if they're talking about, I don't know the relationship you have with the players, but sometimes it will be like, oh, bring your girlfriends to watch the game. say partners
Yeah.
or girlfriends and boyfriends or partners. Keep it partners is super inclusive. If they're younger, bring your parents. It doesn't even need to be, ooh, bring your mom and dad, or but if you have gay parents, bring your dads. It doesn't have to be that. But if you just say parents and carers and things like that, it if you're not necessarily looking for it, you're not going to notice it. But if you are looking for it, you're really going to notice that when exclusive language is heard. So keeping it really generic and open. Um, we'll say a lot, especially with if we have young people who are non-binary playing, just say bring it in team as opposed to bring it in lads. Like it keeps it activity focused, and in doing that language, you're also re-emphasizing the fact that you're a team, but you're also making sure it's inclusive. A good way as well is to talk positively about LGBT people in your life or that you've seen on TV. I recommend Heartstopper, the TV show, to everyone I ever meet. It's aimed at young people. I think it's the when it starts off, the main character's 14, so it is for young people, but it's centered around sport. They're both rugby players, and one of the main characters goes through a real interesting journey with his rugby teammates, and he's the captain of the team, and it's an interesting piece. I mean, as he comes to terms with being bisexual, and there's a scene in it where his school coach plays a really, really, really impactful role on his relationship with rugby, and I love breaking that down and just saying like that's all it is. She just did something really minor, but a lot of this stuff you could just get from entertainment and watching these sorts of shows, and then bring it up at training. Hey, did you see new season of Heartstoppers out? Did you see it? It's really cool the way this rugby player is living his best life. Again, if people aren't, they might not notice it, they might not know it, but if somebody's really looking for it and wants to hear it, and when you're that young and you feel alone, you are also looking out for everything and any sort of reference of kindness and safety. You're going to notice it, and it's going to go a long way. So it doesn't have to be massive things. Hey, I went out for lunch with my sister and her wife. Easy stuff like that. And then when it comes down to the actual sporting piece, is just keep it as neutral as possible.
What happens when coaches have got young people, children in their environments who they might think or might suspect are struggling with sexuality, but they don't feel like they're equipped to deal with it? Where can they turn to search for other resources on this? Or what can they do to make sure that they are there as a coach and as a trusted adult for that young person?
Yeah, there are loads of resources out on that. I would say Just Like Us is a fantastic children's charity based, around children and young people. Give them a shout out. Check their website out, and then you can always get in contact and go from there. Um, but yeah, I would say on this, a lot of it would be just keeping an eye on the player, um, continuing to just signal safety. Don't ask. Don't put anybody in a situation where they don't want to be, or they feel like they might be outed. They'll come to you in their time. But if you continue to make the environment safe and positive, then um, they will come to you in time. Also, if you do ever suspect a safeguarding issue, then follow your usual safeguarding procedures. Being LGBT itself, not a safeguarding issue, but the danger that you might be put into as an LGBT young person could flag things. But I mean, I always say to coaches, like, if somebody comes out to you, give yourself a pat on the back because it means that they trust you. People aren't telling this to people that they don't want to know. Um, it's a good thing. So just continue to create that safe environment where anybody, no matter who they are, they might be a straight cis person who's having other troubles at home, or they might just be stressing out about a breakup or failing an exam, or maybe their parents is not doing well, or they're worried about how they can afford the kit. Like all of these things will be helped just by creating those like super super you know safe environments. And I'm using the word safe a lot, but it that's what it is. It's the comfortability of like, this person, this coach has my back, and I can share with them what I might be going through.
Erin, I think this podcast is going to act as a really incredible resource for coaches who feel like they want to do more in this area and want to be able to provide, like we say, a safer space for their young charges. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been wonderful having you on.
Thank you so much for having me, and yeah, good luck everyone, and enjoy the rest of your coaching seasons.
And thank you guys for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast today, be sure to leave us a review and share this with someone else who you think might like it too. And follow Play Their Way on social media, at Play Their Way on TikTok, X and LinkedIn, and at Play Their Way UK on Facebook and Instagram.